The recording played for 11 seconds. That was all. And Clint Eastwood, who had been leaning forward in the chair across from Jimmy Fallon with both forearms on the desk, pushed the chair back slowly and stood up. Not quickly. Not dramatically. The way a person stands when their legs decide before their mind does. He turned away from Jimmy. He turned away from the audience. He stood with his back to 300 people and said nothing for a very long time. Jimmy Fallon could not speak. Because the voice on that recording had been gone for 4 years. And Clint Eastwood was the only person in Studio 6B who knew whose voice it was. It was a Thursday night in early October. Studio 6B at 30 Rockefeller Plaza was running exactly the way it always runs. Tight. Warm. Precisely calibrated. The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon had settled into the particular rhythm of a night when everything is going right. The monologue had landed. The first segment had run clean. And now, Clint Eastwood was in the guest chair, which changed the temperature of the room in a way that was hard to explain to anyone who wasn't sitting in it. He was 93 years old. He had been in this business for 7 decades. He had the kind of presence that does not require effort. The room simply rearranged itself around him the moment he walked out. 300 people sat a little straighter. Everything was going perfectly. The roots were swaying softly in the corner of the stage, unhurried, the way they always move between segments. Questlove's drumsticks tapped a quiet pattern against the rim of the hi-hat. The audience had settled, shoulders dropped, phones put away. That collective exhale that happens when people realize they are exactly where they want to be. Clint Eastwood was talking about directing. About what it felt like to walk onto a set in the early days, when nothing was guaranteed, and you had to earn the room before it gave you anything back. Jimmy was leaning in the way he leans when he forgets he is on television. Nobody in that studio wanted to be anywhere else. Jimmy waited for the right moment, and then said he had something he wanted Clint to hear. He said it quietly, without ceremony. He reached under the desk and produced a small device. He said he'd explain everything in a moment. He pressed play. Everything was going perfectly. Not loud, not performed, just a voice. A woman's voice, low and steady, speaking directly into a microphone in a room that had gone quiet around her. 11 seconds. And then silence. Clint Eastwood's forearms did not lift immediately from the desk. It took about 3 seconds. But Jimmy saw it. The slight forward tilt of the head. The jaw setting. The eyes, which had been relaxed and present a moment before, going somewhere else entirely. Somewhere back and far away. Somewhere 11 seconds of audio had just opened a door to. His hands moved from the desk to the armrests. He pushed the chair back slowly. He stood. He turned away. Jimmy said nothing. Not his name, not a question. Nothing. The entire studio froze. The audience didn't know what was happening. Had something in the recording been wrong? Had it upset him? He was 93 years old. Was he all right? Those were the thoughts moving through 300 people in the same held silence. None of them correct. All of them watching the broad line of his shoulders, and the absolute stillness of his back, and trying to read something in the way a person stands that tells you what they are feeling inside it. Questlove's drumsticks rested motionless on the rim. The roots had stopped. Every camera held position. And Jimmy Fallon sat at the desk with both hands folded and waited. Because he already knew what was on that recording, and he had known this moment might come, and he had decided before the show began, that when it did, he would not fill it with words. Then, without turning around, Clint Eastwood said one thing. She kept talking. His voice barely above a whisper. Caught perfectly by his microphone. 300 people held their breath. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. To understand what happened next, you need to understand what happened in 1965. Clint Eastwood wasn't always Clint Eastwood, legend. In the spring of 1965 he was 34 years old. Rawhide had been running for 6 years and he was not yet the thing he was about to become. Not yet the man with no name. Not yet the icon that half the world would carry in their memory for the rest of their lives. He was a working actor on a television western, who had agreed to go to Italy and make a film for a director he had never heard of, for a fee that serious people in the industry thought was too low to be worth his time. He did not know yet that the film would change everything. He was simply a man who had said yes to something uncertain, because the work looked real, and the role felt true, and that had always been enough of a reason. He was in Rome in late April of that year, between the end of shooting and the beginning of whatever came next. On a Tuesday evening he went alone to a small music venue in Trastevere, a back room above a restaurant, 40 chairs and a low stage, and a single overhead light that made everything below it look like a painting. The performer that night was a woman named Rosaria Conti. She was 28 years old. She had grown up in Rome, studied voice at the conservatory, and now taught music to children in a neighborhood school during the day, and performed in rooms like this one on the evenings when the room would have her. She sang without accompaniment. She sang in Italian and once in English, a slow, unadorned version of a song he recognized, stripped of everything except the melody and what her voice did with it. He stayed for both sets. He introduced himself afterward, in the awkward Italian he had been accumulating for 2 months on set. She answered in careful, precise English, which she had learned from American records and old films and had never had reason to use on an actual American before. He asked about the English song. She said she had heard it in a film she loved and had been trying to understand ever since what made certain melodies feel like memories of things that never happened to you. He thought about that for a long moment, and then said he thought it was because honest music doesn't belong to the person who wrote it. It belongs to whoever needs it. She looked at him steadily and said, "Yes. Exactly that." They talked for 2 hours at a small table near the back of the room. At some point she produced a small reel-to-reel recorder, the kind journalists carried in those years, and said she recorded every performance, for herself, to hear where she had gone wrong. She played a few seconds of that evening's second set. His voice was on it too, at the edges, asking a question from the audience. He had not known she was recording. He asked if he could hear it again. She played it twice. He sat very still and listened both times. He left Rome 4 days later. They did not exchange addresses because it was 1965 and the mechanisms for staying in touch across an ocean were slow and expensive, and easy to let slide. He went back to California. A Good, a Bad and the Ugly came out the following year, and the world reorganized itself around what he had become. She kept teaching. She kept performing in small rooms. She married in 1969, and had 2 children and a life full in the quiet way lives are full, when a person has chosen the right things. She kept the reel-to-reel recording for 55 years. Her daughter Elena found it after Rosaria passed. Stage 4. The doctors had given her perhaps 6 months. She had taken 8, precisely, as though she had a schedule to keep. In the last weeks, she had written a letter to Clint Eastwood's production company. Not asking for anything, simply saying, "I met you once in Rome in 1965 after a performance, and you said something about music that I have thought about every day since. I want you to know that it was true. I spent my whole life finding out that it was true." She enclosed a short recording, a digital transfer of 11 seconds from the reel to reel. Just his voice from the edge of the room asking a question she had been happy to answer. Elena mailed it after her mother died. It reached the right person 4 months later. And Clint Eastwood listened to it alone, in his office in Carmel, with the door closed, and then sat with it for a long time before he picked up the phone. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Behind the scenes, Clint Eastwood had made a decision that defied every producer's expectation. He had called The Tonight Show himself. He had asked for one condition, that Elena, Rosaria's daughter, be seated in the studio audience, 4th row, center, without being told the reason. He had not told Jimmy what the recording contained. He had not told the segment producers. He had told one person on the production team the shape of what might happen, and he had said, "If it does, don't cut away." The production team had agreed. Clint Eastwood asking you something in that particular quiet voice is not a request you find easy to decline. Now on the Tonight Show stage, Clint Eastwood was standing with his back to 300 people. And the studio was completely still. Elena, in the fourth row, had both hands pressed flat against her thighs. She had not been told about the recording. She had not been told that her mother's letter had arrived, or that it had been read, or that she was sitting 20 feet from the man her mother had spoken to on a Tuesday evening in Rome 59 years ago. But this is the moment no one in the studio, and no one watching at home ever saw coming. Clint Eastwood turned around. He did not sit back down. He stood at the edge of the desk and said, "Is she here? Rosaria's daughter. Is she in this room?" Elena stood before she understood that she was standing. She made a sound, not a word, just a sound. And he turned his face toward it with the precision of a man who has spent a lifetime listening for the thing underneath what people say. He said, "Your mother sent me 11 seconds of a night in 1965. His voice was steady and very quiet, and the microphone caught every word. "In those 11 seconds I am asking her a question. I have been asking that question my whole career. Every film. Every frame. I just did not know, until 4 years ago, that someone had kept the recording of me asking it." He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced a small index card. On it, in his own handwriting, were 4 lines. He said, "I wrote down what she said to me that night in Rome. The next morning, in the hotel. I have carried this card in every jacket I have owned since 1965. He held it up so the room could see it without being able to read it. Then he walked to the edge of the stage and held it out toward where Elena's voice had come from. Jimmy Fallon was already up from the desk. He did not deliberate. He walked to the edge of the stage, sat down on it, legs hanging over the side, and said, "Folks, some things can't be planned. Some things just need to happen." Elena came forward. Nobody redirected her. Nobody spoke into a headset. She reached up and took the index card from Clint Eastwood's hand with both of hers. He kept his hand around hers for a moment before he let go. She looked at what was written on it. She looked up at him. She said, "She quoted this to me. When I was a child. I didn't know where it came from." His voice, barely above a whisper, "I didn't know where it went." Questlove stood up slowly from the drum kit. Just stood. The director did not cut to commercial. The camera operators did not move. Clint Eastwood sat back down in the guest chair and said he wanted to play something. Not perform it, just play it. And he named a piece of music that Rosaria had sung that Tuesday night in 1965. A melody that nobody in that studio recognized by name, but that 300 people felt they had always known. He played it from his phone, quietly, through the desk monitor. And the studio was completely silent. Not waiting. Not holding back. Just listening. The way people listen when they understand they are inside something that will not come again. Jimmy Fallon was openly crying. Not quietly. Not carefully. In front of every camera, without any attempt to stop. Questlove was crying. The camera operator nearest the stage had stopped moving entirely. And then 300 people who had come to watch a talk show on a Thursday night in October were holding the hands of strangers around them, row by row. Without anyone asking them to. Without anyone announcing that this was the moment to do it. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. After the show, Elena stayed on the stage for nearly an hour. She and Clint Eastwood sat in the empty studio while the crew worked quietly around them. And she told him things about her mother that she had never told anyone. The way Rosaria had described that night in Rome. The specific way she said his name when she mentioned it, which was rarely, and always quietly. The index card now lives in a frame on Elena's kitchen wall. next to a photograph of her mother performing in Trastevere in 1971, taken by someone who did not know they were preserving anything. Clint Eastwood, at the beginning of every project, writes the 4 lines from the card into a new notebook. He did not know, until Rosaria's letter arrived, that there had ever been a witness to where the habit began. Jimmy Fallon has not spoken about that night publicly. But his producer has said once that it is the only segment he has ever seen Clint Eastwood sit through without once checking whether the cameras were on him. Because a 34-year-old man walked into a back room above a restaurant in Rome in 1965 and heard someone say the true thing. And he wrote it down the next morning. And he never stopped carrying it. Because some recordings catch more than they mean to. Because some voices keep talking long after the room has gone quiet. And because some questions, asked in the right room, in the right year, take a lifetime to find their way back to you answered.